I'm going to call to order the first meeting of the Prison Population Task Force. Let me say this is an informal task force. As all of you know, it was not set up in statute or anything like that. It was merely put together by myself and Representative Cornish to gather some information ahead of the legislative session.
To give you an idea, the divergence of opinions that we're going to face here is that there's a number of my constituents that don't think there's anything wrong with putting people in prison. Especially when we read the papers and we find some of these people with 27 DWIs still driving, we find people that are raping and murdering that have been convicted and served 3 short sentences in a row before we finally got a clue and locked them up.
During the bonding tour, you and I discussed very briefly the fact that Appleton is standing empty, privately owned, and I acknowledge that you are not real interested in private prison system, and I will tell you I happen to agree with you. I think that Department of Corrections is a public safety issue and therefore should be within the public realm. But we did discuss the possibility of leasing that facility to the Department of Corrections. And for the committee members, that's a 1,500-bed facility sitting empty. The $140-some million bonding request is for a 500-bed facility at Rush City. And so my request to you, Commissioner Roy, is, I think, pretty straightforward. Can your department provide us with a cost-benefit analysis of the possibility of leasing that facility run by the Department of Corrections? And I know that you had talked about administrative costs and so forth, but I would like to see a comparison of what it would cost us to lease that facility containing 1,500 beds versus building a new facility at Rush Lake and possibly others in the future for $141 million. And would you be in a position to provide that to us so that we would have that information available prior to the next session when we are going to be considering this Rush City bonding request?
Yeah, for Senator Newman's information, I had anticipated at least one of the topics at the next task force meeting would be a more in-depth analysis of the options at Appleton.
My hope for this task force is that we're going to look at reducing the number of people that we incarcerate, not just look at expanding the need for more prisons. And if it's a short-term fix, then leasing, I think Senator Newman's on to something, and Senator Latz. But if it's going to be the long-term solution, why wouldn't we look at buying it instead of it sitting empty? I would think you would get a good price at this point. But again, my hope is that we're going to look at how to reduce that population so we don't need those beds.
Just over 1,100 property offenses or 1,900 drug offenses. The reality is those are quality of life crimes, and the property offenses, if you've been a victim of a home burglary or a stolen vehicle, those are significant crimes, and likely we're not talking first-time offenders, and we can say, you know, there's too many drug offenders in prison. You can say that up until they sell your kids drugs. And then you think prison's exactly where they belong. And so I think, is there use in looking at broad-scale reforms? Absolutely. But in the wholesale, people that are sentenced to prison, 9 times out of 10 belong in prison for some period of time. Now, do we need to look at mandatory minimums and those types of sentences? Absolutely. But this idea that if you're in prison for a property crime or a drug offense, you flat out don't belong there, that's just not true. That is absolutely not true. We have a very low incarceration rate. We need to make sure that the people that commit crimes and habitual criminals go to prison and stay in prison, and those that are reformable, or we can do early detention, early diversion, we can do that. But if you're a habitual offender, you need to be in prison. You've told society and your neighbors you can't get along well with others, and you need to be excluded, and that's just a fact.
I'll just respond briefly to what you said, Representative Zerwas. 9 out of 10 of these people probably need to be incarcerated. Well, I mean, when you look at the over 3,000, that's 300 we can get rid of right now that maybe don't need to be in prison. So I think if we really start to uncover and sort of dissect what we're doing with our criminal justice system, and I'm not going to disagree, there are individuals that do need to be removed from society. There are also other habitual criminals that are habitual because of mental illness, because of drug addiction and other types of things. And if we ignore those factors, even with habitual criminals, I think we're really missing the point, and we're not increasing public safety, which I think the whole goal of what we're doing here today should be, first and foremost, increasing public safety, and secondarily, looking at what we're doing with our criminal justice system and the increase and escalations of costs associated with it. Because as I heard Grover Norquist say, there's one thing that Republicans hate more than, let me try to get this right. There's one thing that Republicans hate more than having people out that are in prison, and that is locking people up and paying a cost for those individuals that don't need to be out. So I think it's critical to stop and think about how we're spending our taxpayers' money, and are we getting, as I think Representative Considine mentioned earlier, a bang for our buck, with the primary purpose, of course, being public safety first. Thanks.
I guess I would venture to ask, if we instead treated people with substance abuse and mental illness instead of incarcerating them, would that not decrease the population considerably?
Mr. Chair, Senator, we have outcome studies that look at chemical dependency, sex offender treatment, mental health treatment, and those studies indicate to us that treatment in our facilities reduces recidivism and return to prison, sometimes up to 20%.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Eaton.
So if treatment is that successful, then why don't we do it instead of incarcerating people?
Mr. Chair, we have a system that does both. Unfortunately, our treatment affects only about 30% of those that come to us. The dollar figure attached to treatment is for about every 100 treatment beds, it costs about $1.2 million. So 2 sessions ago, the committee supported expansion of our treatment programs, and we were very thankful that we got that money to do that. I could sit here today and suggest that we could take $50 million more and focus on treatment and have pretty good results.
We're not talking about widgets here. We're not talking about the same predictable outcome based on inputs and how we put somebody through the assembly line. We're talking about real lives, real people that are removed from society, the impact it has on their family, on friends, on other people, that we really ought to be looking at those first-time offenders and understand the value of youth intervention programs and treatment programs, and making it clear that these individuals can avoid prison towards changing their life and through proper treatment. I think we can reduce the cost to our society, not only in terms of dollars, but in terms of the impact to the rest of us and those who threaten public safety.
In why they're coming back, I mean, I'm only speculate that a great number are a dirty UA and they don't remain clean, and so I have some concerns that, you know, we set people up for failure the minute they walk out, and we don't, I mean, you put them back into fire and they're covered in gasoline, they're going to burn up, and it's not going to be pretty. And so how are we addressing those concerns? I mean, environment is a huge issue, and if their family situation isn't right, and I know we count on that, the minute they come into prison, and if we put somebody in on a short term, if they're there a year and a day, the minute they're there, they're already should be working on reentry programs, right? If you really want to address criminal justice reform and you want to keep people out of prison, then we give them a good education and make sure they have living wage jobs. End of discussion. Now, there's going to be those people that are never going to be fit for society, but there are some of those folks that if they had had some opportunity, they wouldn't be there.
I might be the only one in the room that's actually spent time on the inside. I might be the only one in the room that's gone through treatment successfully. One size doesn't fit all. And I think there was a time when we thought we could define a system, and I think the sentencing guidelines actually try to get there where we can kind of make it one size fits all. Is do we want to continue to spend money, or do we want to look at ways to invest money? And investment